Are you wanting to get into filmmaking but just don't know how? Today, I'm sitting down with a good pal who's a filmmaker, podcast host, and adjunct professor to discuss just that right here on Slasher Sports Cinema.
They say that I have shed innocent blood. What's blood for, if not for shedding?
I'm my number one fan.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
God, it knows I'm here.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
You're listening to the Slasher Sports Show with Billy Graves.
He's made over 30 short films and one feature, including his most recent film, the award-winning documentary, House of Oddities, the story of the Atrocity Exhibition. He's the host of the podcast, The Cinema Psycho Show. I'm happy to welcome Brian Cottington. Brian, welcome.
Hi, Billy. Thank you for having me on. Glad to be here. Glad to talk about some movies with your movie.
Absolutely, my man.
Will.
Listen, you're in it, man. Let's just start, from the very beginning.
Sure.
You went to Robert Morris University?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What did you study there?
So at Robert Morris University, I went in and I studied TV video production with a focus in media arts. And actually, I caught the film bug prior to that. I actually caught the film bug in high school. So I don't know if your high school had a TV station at all, but mine did. And we had to do the morning announcements. And that was my first exposure to filmmaking. And it's kind of been downhill ever since. But no, it was something where I've always been involved with the arts and painting, sculpture, drawing. And when I got exposed to filmmaking, it was like, oh, it's like takes all of that and rolls it up into one medium. So I knew that this was something that I wanted to kind of commit my life to, and have been fortunate enough to do that. But yeah.
My high school, we would have been lucky to have a parking lot, let alone a TV station. But it's all good. There's actually one thing that I know Robert Morris University for.
Yeah.
And it's feels like a decade ago. Could be more, could be less. But they upset the University of Kentucky in men's basketball.
Yeah,
I think it was in a prominent tournament. They probably talk about that a lot.
I mean, when I was there, so I was there in 2006, and I graduated in I think it was in 10 or 11. So this was right at the time when we really were just starting to really like be good in basketball. I really don't follow sports, to be perfectly honest with you, but like Robert Morris was known really for one thing in the sports realm prior to that, and that was hockey. Our hockey team was like one of the best in the region, and right around that time, that's when it started to shift more towards basketball. Whereas now I think they disbanded the hockey team, which pissed off a lot of alumni.
Whoa, like
yeah.
you're around Pittsburgh. Okay,
yeah.
That's it almost seems like a sacrilegious move.
Well, I mean, Pittsburgh is a weird town. Have you ever been here?
Never.
Okay, so Pittsburgh's a weird town. We're mostly a football town. That's really what we're known for. It's the Steelers. Everyone knows that.
Sure.
Pirates, we lose all the time. So we're known for a beautiful stadium that has really good food. I can't say a good sports team because they're terrible. But they always get good once they get traded. Like, that's kind of what ends up happening, We're kind of like the farm team for every other, team in the MLB. But
I shouldn't say it, but I'm gonna. We actually used to joke that the Pirates were going to get sent down to AAA like they do in soccer. When they relegate them to a lower. But I've got a soft spot for Pittsburgh. The Pirates, that is. so I'm not going to say too much about it. And we've got some really good friends, Cody Patanko and David Stegan. Those guys, we cover baseball with, on the other half of Slasher Sports, and those guys have come on and been like some of the most gracious guests. Could never ever say a bad thing about Pittsburgh, not for very long anyway.
Right.
So.
But to get my point, like the hockey thing has been only a relatively recent thing that's really, kind of made its mark on Pittsburgh. So, and Robert Morris was really, they had really good relationship with the Penguins, and it was really bizarre when the president of RMU, or I believe it's the outgoing president of RMU, decided to like cut it, and we're just like, why? And to their credit, they're like, well, we're getting more money from the basketball team and everything that goes with it. And, that's where the focus is now at, which I was like, okay, well, you just pissed off all your alumni who are going to give you money for these sorts of things. So good luck with that. But yeah, like that's pretty much what my exposure was, the sports side of Robert Morris. But, while I was there, I did do television video there. I hosted and produced my own TV show that I kind of think of as like the proto version of my podcast. And
this is RMU TV?
This is on RMU TV, and it actually went out to the entire Moon Township area, because that's where Rob Morris is based out of. And it was great, and it was fun. I even did like the news and a little bit of the Sports Center, which they called Colonial Sports Center. So I got exposed to all of these little facets of television broadcast. And the one thing, though, that wasn't really prominent at the time was actual filmmaking, which is funny because now it's kind of flipped, where if you go to Robert Morris now, you're getting more of the filmmaking side, the art side, and less of the broadcast side, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
But you worked your way through the ranks there at RMU TV, right?
I did. We were required to take TV video hours when we were there. So we had to kind of be a PA, and, you do that for a little bit. And then someone would say, oh, wow, you're really good. Do you want to jump on and do, graphics? So you do some graphics work. Or they might say, hey, you want to run your own show? And you're like, yeah, sure. Why not? So, I kind of started in that in doing the news, and, a friend of mine at the time wanted to do a movie review show. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I know about movies. And so they were like, well, you can be the host of it. So I came up with this persona called Johann Blitzkrieg, which is a crazy German film reviewer, film critique. And, the whole idea behind the show was that we would critique student work. So, in our film classes, we would work on these things, but they would never get shown. So we're like, well, here's a platform that we could show. And this was right at the time that YouTube was really becoming a thing. So, it's not like we'll just post a thing on YouTube and you're good to go. It's like, no. YouTube still is very, very early stage. So we really were providing a platform for the students at RMU. They give us their work, we play it, we talk about it, and also have like skits and comedy, weaved in between it. My younger brother went to RMU at the same time as I did. We were in the same major, which is very fun, by the way. And, he was also in it too, and kind of came up with his own character. So it was really fun and a nice, like, creative exercise in creating content that grabs your audience. And that's something that anyone who's involved in filmmaking, that's what you want to do. You want to grab your audience, bring them in.
And was Prime Cuts Theater something that was involved in this?
That was it. That was the show.
That was the show. Okay.
Yep.
And at what point did you decide you wanted to dedicate to short films? Because that's a large portion of your resume.
Yeah. So short films, it's more or less a matter of the business of filmmaking is very expensive, and it's something where, as anyone who's doing this medium, it's very difficult to kind of come up with the money to do a feature. And I still have yet to do a narrative feature. I've done a documentary feature, which is a lot easier to do. But doing a narrative feature where you actually you write a script and you cast actors and you go out and film the thing and you get locations, it's very expensive. So shorts are a nice way of testing the waters. And that's kind of what I've done. On top of that, for me personally, a lot of the shorts that I made were shorts for something else. So, a lot of them were shorts that I made for a group called the Atrocity Exhibition. And it's what my documentary was about. But this was a 360-degree art exhibition that happened for 10 years. And I was fortunate enough to be the lead video designer for that exhibition. So basically my job was to take the theme, and this art exhibition was filled with people who were doing burlesque, sideshow, a lot of really dark, bizarre stuff, very heavy in like the underground goth scene in Pittsburgh. And they also brought in a lot of vendors who would, sell their artwork. So I got to know a lot of the people involved in that, and they saw that I was involved in film. And that was kind of my first experience working with a client and really creating something that was creative, that was centered around an idea that I didn't necessarily have to originate the idea from. I was usually given whatever the theme was for that particular year and had pretty much free reign to take that theme and run with it, to the point where a lot of my later short films, the more recent ones, really were self-contained films in their own right. Like, you could take them outside of the art exhibition and watch them on your own, and you'd be like, oh wow, there's a story here. So that's kind of what I've done. Always working my way up to, like, eventually we're going to make the feature. And actually during the beginning days of the pandemic, I, like a lot of people, was like, well, I can't go into work because, the world's on fire.
Right.
So what am I going to do? And I told my wife, I'm like, I've always wanted to write a feature-length script. So I took what was a short film that I made for the Atrocity Exhibition, the last year of it, and wrote a feature version of it. So that's kind of where I'm thinking the next thing is going to be is trying to turn that into a full-length, feature-length version of one of those short films.
And do you feel that maybe creating a feature-length film is kind of a graduation from short film creation? Yes. Or yeah. And yeah. So probably because, like, you've taken elements and now you can.
It's something that, a short film is good for two things. One, it's good for testing the waters of something that is going to cost money. Okay. So in filmmaking, every minute that you're on set is costing money, be it the amount of money that you have to pay for craft services, the amount of money you have to pay in the rental of gear, because contrary to what most people think, not everyone's buying gear when they're making a film.
Sure.
Oftentimes they're renting it. So you're literally, it really is the idea of time is money, and you're literally burning that money every minute that you're on set and you're not getting what you need. So if there's, for whatever reason, let's say there's a really cool effect that I want to try, or there's some gag or some weird technique that I've seen and I'm like, oh, this would be cool to try out. Try to do that on a feature without testing it and not really knowing if it's going to work or not is kind of dangerous. And that's where a short film really works, is that you can test the waters with that effect or with that type of editing, or even just honing your ability to tell a story. That's really good testing ground. You're not going to make a career at that, though. And that's the thing, is that short films really aren't for that. The other side of the coin is that short films are really good for getting your name out there, for, one, putting together a reel that can get you work in the film industry. If you're an editor and you want to edit movies or edit anything, you have that reel of short films, even if they're like, hey, you know what, this played at some, film festival that's, down the street, but hey, you know what, it's something, and you put that in a reel and now it gets you work that way. The other thing it does is that if you are looking for investors, if you're looking for people, and you are like, hey, I want to make a feature version of this short film, well, you've got something you can actually show them. You're not just going in there with an elevator pitch like, imagine that it's, Batman, but he is a zombie. Like, you could say, well, actually, no. Here's the link to the movie. I made a short version of it. I like to expand upon it into a feature. You have something you can actually show. So that's where I see the value in short films.
I also see value in short films, and I think that I don't really have any data to back this up, but I do feel like short films might be good for the current generation of viewer, because we know that that they kind of seek that instant gratification, right?
Yeah, and it is one of the things that I think short films. If you go into the short film knowing that you're making a short film, it's almost like you want to take that short film and you actually want to break it apart into micro shorts almost, because that's where, especially if you're targeting like TikTok or Instagram and you want to make something along those realms, taking that short film and breaking it apart. I also think that's why the rise of, marquee television is because of the shorts. Like, you think about it, we're used to watching a movie that's 2 hours long, but now we can, in essence, watch a 45-minute long episode of something, and you've got 10 of those, So it's stretching out the narrative a bit, kind of like a short would be. But yeah, I think that this generation, their attention span is measured in nanoseconds, so you kind of have to get to the point.
You do.
With the short.
But there were some really good short films that I've watched over the past year.
Mm-hmm.
There's one called Cerdita, which is the short film for the new feature length Piggy.
Oh,
yeah. Cerdita was basically the cold open of Piggy.
Right.
And different actors, because they did reshoot everything. Because, I guess the antagonist shows up for the rest of the film and they don't have the same actor. So they did some different things.
I almost got a chance to see Piggy at Erie Horror Fest, and because it was playing there, and I think it won Best Feature at that. But it was playing right behind us as we were recording one of our episodes. So I've heard only good things about it.
Yeah, definitely. If you can check it out.
Yeah.
And if not, Cerdita is the short cold open. Yeah. For all intents and purposes. So tell me, did you have a mentor or a few mentors in certain areas of film?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple mentors when I was at Robert Morris TV. He was the station manager. His name was Michael DeLauro. He was kind of our mentor, at least when it came to creating the content. He liked the humor that we brought to it, which we like to think that Prime Cuts Theater was the redheaded stepchild of RMU TV, because it absolutely was. We were brash. We were not really broadcast ready, and we played always at 11 o'clock at night. But he got it, and he appreciated the humor, and he supported us all the time. A couple other professors I had there, I had this amazing screenwriting teacher. Her name is Melissa Martin. She's directed a number of films in her own right. One of her most famous ones is a movie called The Bread, My Sweet. It's also called A Wedding for Bella. And I learned so much about creating a story from her when I took her class. And it still has always stuck with me today. Whenever I craft a script, I kind of have her in my head talking to me about, this is what the character means. And the final person that really, for me was kind of a mentor was is a professor named Tony Buba. And Tony, he's kind of a living legend in Pittsburgh, especially Braddock area. So Tony was, if you've seen Dawn of the Dead, he was the sound mixer for George Romero in that film. His brother Pasquale, who unfortunately passed away a number of years ago, was the editor for Dawn of the Dead and a number of films in his own right. I think he edited Heat with Val Kilmer and Robert De Niro. But Tony was also featured in the movie as the Mexican biker who puts his arm in the heart check, like the blood pressure thing. Yeah, he was that guy. and he was someone who really taught me a lot about the importance of structure in a film and the importance of editing and even just camera work. But and it's funny is like I talked to him recently, like I think it was late last year, and he still got it. Like he's older, but he's still sharp as a tack. He also is a accomplished documentarian, award-winning documentarian. His most famous work has been a movie he made in the 80s called Lightning Over Braddock, which is about the downfall of the community of Braddock in Pennsylvania, and just how all the steel mills kind of dried up and pretty much the town is pretty much languished. So he's kind of been a big mentor to me.
Wow. So I guess a lot of people who want to get into film, they just don't have a clue where to begin. A good friend of mine, his name is Ben Johnson. He's made it his mission to show people that if you're thinking you have to be in a clique, you have to be highly educated or plugged into some social pipelines with some high up people to make a film, you're wrong. And it can sound like a trite bit of lip service, but I mean, I believe him. To the person who isn't plugged in, would you suggest bite-sized goals, maybe writing a short story, or what would you suggest to the beginner?
Well, first of all, I mean, where you're at now is a lot easier to get into filmmaking than it was when I started, because you have this thing called a cell phone, and it's in your pocket, and it's without a doubt, and it sounds cliche, but it's true. It's without a doubt the best camera that you've got at your disposal if you have no money. Because just about everyone has a cell phone, and even like the shitty ones that you get that maybe are like, you pay monthly and there's no contract. Even those have fairly decent cameras. So I really say this, write up a 1-page story. Doesn't have to be great, and just go out there and film the thing. I got started with literally a handy cam and my brother's in my backyard. We shot one of the first things I ever shot when I was in high school was a lightsaber battle, and there was no story about it. It was just called, I had these plastic lightsabers. I wanted to film it, and I wanted to practice a visual effect. So we filmed the thing. The lights were terrible because there were no lights. There was no sound because there was no sound. So, just go out and shoot the damn thing. And what you're going to find is if you do this enough, you will start to see what works and what doesn't work. What is a mistake and what isn't a mistake. And if you take those lessons and you start building upon them and building upon them and building upon them, eventually you're going to get to the point where your movies are going to have that, that sheen to it that we think of when we think of a movie. And you might say, well, Brian, I don't have the time for that. Well, I would argue that you do. The time that you maybe would spend watching a TV show, playing video games, going on the internet, scrolling through social media, that's time that you could devote to your craft. That's time you could devote to bettering yourself. Maybe instead of scrolling on TikTok, and again, this is sounding like the old man, yelling at the sky here. Maybe instead of spending time on TikTok, you watch a YouTube video about how to do visual effects, or you watch a YouTube video on how to edit. Okay, that's what I do, and I get my wife continually says, "You're kind of a nerd because you spend your time watching YouTube videos about different visual effects." Because that's in the different facets of filmmaking, visual effects and motion graphics and editing is where my brain goes. Like, as much as I love production and love directing, I make my living, and then on top of that, like it's something I teach, is visual effects and post-production. So, but I would tell anyone who's getting started, just make the thing. Even if it's crap, even if you're like, I don't want anyone to ever see this, make the thing, put it online, and see what people say about it. And yeah, you're going to have some jackass who says, this is garbage. Okay, fine. Who cares?
Laugh at them and move on.
Laugh at them and move on. Because you keep doing that, and eventually you're going to start to see what works. And I would also tell someone, if you want to make movies, watch them. Watch movies. I one time got laughed at by a student who he wasn't someone I was teaching, but he was someone who was in like a cohort, and he's like, "Oh, I could never be a director." And I'm like, why not? He's like, well, I don't want to be a director. I could never direct. I'm like, do you watch movies? Yeah. Then you're a director. Like, it sounds ridiculous, but it's like half of the knowledge that you get for making film is from watching it. Because when you watch things and you watch scenes, you're going to know what works, what doesn't work, what connects to you, and just try to replicate that. You know? I think you're muted.
Can you remember the first project you finished when you felt like you really did something?
When I made something like really good, or like the first project that I made that I was like
the first that you were proud of.
Oh, the first I was proud of that was not really good looking back. Okay, I'll go with that one. So I don't know if your high school had this, but we had this thing called the senior
Probably
project.
Not.
We had this thing called the senior project, which was evil incarnate. And I don't think they actually do it anymore, but it was required that we had to do a project and a paper to graduate. So you couldn't graduate unless you did the stupid project. And, you know, I'd already caught the film bug from working at the TV station in high school. And so I was like, well, you know, I have a belief in the paranormal, so I wanted to make a short film about how Hollywood views paranormal. So I made the script, and I literally spent like months writing the script. It was pure garbage, but I still did it. I literally did it in study hall. Every time I was in study hall, I was writing the script. We got with friends, got my crappy handycam, and we got some work lights, and we made this movie, and I edited the thing all in iMovie, and this was like iMovie in 2004, okay? And I was so proud of it because we had done some terrible visual effects, terrible makeup. The story made no sense, but it was a start to finish movie. You know, it had a beginning, it had a middle, and had an end. Was it great? No. But I played the thing in every class that I had, because after we showed the film and for the senior project, I got the tape and I was like, I'm going to go to art class, I'm going to play the movie. And no one else had done a movie in the high school that I went to. No one had done that before as their project. So I kind of broke a new ground in that. And yeah, I had some jackasses who were like, this movie's crap. But then I had also other people like, oh man, that's so cool. So like that was the first moment that I got as a filmmaker where I felt proud of the work I had spent. Like I had spent months working on this thing. And is it great? No. But it was my first film. It was my first exposure to having audience feedback. And it's still like the benchmark for me. Getting that feeling of showcasing your work that you spend a lot of time on, that really kind of sells it for me and why I do what I do.
You know, I really get bad cases of writer's block.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for somebody who might be struggling to create, whether it be writing, producing, podcasting, or whatever their creative outlet is?
Yeah. So I ran into the same problem. I mentioned earlier that during the pandemic, the beginning days of it, I decided I wanted to write a feature-length screenplay. And, you know, I was not sure how I wanted to take the film. So the short film, it's called The Autumn People, and it is available in my portfolio that I sent you. And, you know, I knew that I wanted to take it into a feature, but I was like, do I go serious? Do I go in the comedic route? And I struggle with it. And I kept going back and forth. I'm like, well, if it's a serious side, like that's what modern horror is now. But if it's comedy, you know, it's not really, you know, that's not really where my head's at. And so, like, I literally was driving to the grocery store one day. Okay. And as soon as I was driving to the grocery store on the way there, and we're talking like maybe like 3 minutes away, while I was driving, it hit me. I'm like, lean into it. So I leaned into the fact that this movie is basically Hellraiser combined with Night of the Demons. Like, and once that hit, the floodgates were open. The minute I admitted that, like, this is what it is, all the ideas started flooding. So my advice to anyone who's struggling is to kind of take a break from it. Like, I think part of the problem I was having was I was trying to fit it into a box that I don't think the concept was going to be, and I was overthinking it, and I was trying to will the idea out of my head, and trying to will the idea out of your head is kind of what creates that writer's block. So, it's one of those things where it's like, take a step back. For me, it was driving to the grocery store and, just kind of wait for the idea to hit. And it sounds frustrating. You're like, well, I can't make it happen. It's like, no, not really. And the thing too, I will say is the experiences we have in our lives, that shapes our creativity. So if you are finding that you are struggling to kind of come up with an idea, take a break, do something that is unrelated to the task of writing something or making something or doing your podcast or whatever. Take a break from it. Find something else to do. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe it's watching a movie. Maybe it's just playing a video game. Doing something else to take your mind off the task. And eventually you're going to have the aha moment. It's going to hit you in the back of your brain and you're going to be like, oh God, why did I not think of this before? Because as soon as I did that, I'm not kidding you, it was like, we're off to the races. Like everything kind of came clear.
So tell me about your podcast and about your co-hosts.
So my podcast is called The Cinema Psycho Show, and I created it in 2016. And really, at the time that I created it, I needed to have a creative outlet. So prior to the pandemic, everything goes back to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I was working a job that was not creatively fulfilling in the least bit. I was doing events AV. So I was not doing anything in the film medium. I was still doing film like kind of, here and there. But nothing that was necessarily, scratching the creative itch. So I had done a little bit of experimentation with audio, a year prior with a former partner of mine. His name is Johnny Daggers, and we did a show called Dagger Vision Films Horror Talk Radio. And that got me kind of exposed to the idea of podcasting, but it was more live audio. It wasn't necessarily pre-recorded like this is. And so I wanted to find something to kind of fit the creative niche that I needed. And I was like, well, why don't I just talk about movies? But instead of talk about horror movies, talk about all types of movies. And so I had got my master's at Chatham University, and I met a number of people while there that I still talk to, specifically John Woolscroft and Lane Wilson. And at the time they were married. Unfortunately, now they're not. But we kind of came together, and I wanted to bring them on as co-hosts. And I wanted to get their comedy, because they literally were some of the funniest people that I've ever met. And also some of the smartest people when it came to film. And so the idea behind the podcast was that it was going to be a mixture between vulgar comedy, because our show is extremely explicit, coupled with some really smart film critique. Like, we will at one moment go from talking about, let's say here, we were just talking most recently about Hellraiser Revelations and how terrible that movie is and how there's weird, creepy incest vibes in it. And we'll talk about that, but then also talk about, the importance of The Exorcist and kind of how The Exorcist was a backlash against conservative ideology when it came to religion. So like, we'll go back and forth on those sorts of things. And that's just kind of how we roll. And there really weren't a whole lot of podcasts at the time that did that. Now there's more of them. Smodcast was kind of the big one. Kevin Smith's Smodcast was the big one that was doing that. So we kind of just did it, and we've been at it since then. We're at 250 episodes. We've done some live shows. We've met a lot of people. I've met the cast of Troll 2. I've met my co-host has met Greg Sestero. But from the room, excuse me. We've met a lot of people and gotten a lot of opportunities within the film industry because of the podcast. And for me, the biggest thing is my day job now is partially a result of my podcast. I work for a company called Libsyn. We're a podcast distribution company. And, part of getting the job was because I was familiar with the hosting, because my show hosts with them. So it kind of ended up becoming full circle there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I actually listened to the Hellraiser episode, but the most recent episode I heard was the on Craven's Scream.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
So it was. Who was the person giving off all the harsh reviews of Scream?
That was me.
That was you? Okay. At the time, I didn't know voices.
No, that was me. That was totally me.
Let me just say, I concur.
Okay.
I'm only a fan of the first one.
The first one has softened on me a little bit as I've gotten older. But as I mentioned in that episode, what was funny, I didn't mention this in the review we did. So a day later, we got to interview the cast of Children of the Corn, and the actor who plays Malachi was listening to us review, because we were recording. We did a batch recording at the Erie Horror Fest, and they were guests there. So he's listening to our review, and he almost crashed our recording. And he literally said, he's like, I wanted to come in and jump in the recording. I'm like, why didn't you? You're more than welcome to. And he told me that he agreed wholeheartedly with my opinion. And his opinion was that Scream really marked the commercialization of horror beyond what it was before. No one is going to say that the horror movie hasn't been a cash grab. It absolutely is. But
sure.
it up to the level where it was now a matter of, well, let's not worry about telling a good story. How much money can we make off of this thing?
Yeah, now it's on the Walmart shelves of the theoretical horror.
And then, of course, you attract the venture capitalist who doesn't know a fucking thing about how to make a movie. And it's now a matter of, well, this venture capitalist in New York is backing the film, so whatever you can do to make the movie quick and cheap and get that out the door, that's where it is. And I really think the Scream kind of marked that turn. And it also, and this was something that Courtney Gaines, who was the actor who played Malachi, mentioned. He's like, the movies in the 80s, they were all made by independent studios. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
They were distributed by the big ones, but they were produced by smaller indie studios. And Scream was I mean, you could say Dimension Films was smaller, but not really. They're more or less a mini major, if anything. But yeah,
they were an indie.
That was my thing about Scream, was that it marked the death of that spark that the 80s horror films and even the early 90s had going for it.
And that's not even the full reason that I don't like the series as much. I do like the first one for what it is, but I get lightly offended when people put Ghostface on the elite movie killers list.
No.
Because, first of all, how can Ghostface be elite if it's never the same person?
It's never the same person, and on top of that,
gets the shit kicked out of him
all he does is he gets beaten up by somebody and keeps coming back, and it's like
it's a slapstick type of chase down, and I'm not a fan of it, and I'm fine. There's not another slapstick killer, and I'm fine with there being one, but it's not the same person. Like when you say, hey, who would win between Michael and Ghostface? What was Ghostface you talking about? The little tiny lady? The little tiny gal from part 5? Come on, man.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Which one are we talking about here?
Yeah, there's no, even at your most deranged Billy Loomis.
Well, my co-host pulled it off. My co-host John mentioned it perfectly. He's like, there are some major league plot holes in Scream. Like, he brought up how Henry Winkler gets killed, and then in the same day is hung on the flagpole. Not the flagpole, but the football, like, goal posts. There's no way in hell that would happen in broad daylight.
No.
By two people.
By
not
two
possible.
People. No. You're not hanging a man on the goalpost.
No.
Especially not the Fonz.
No.
Okay?
Well, no. But it's just I appreciate it for reviving the slasher. I'll give it that. I don't appreciate that its trajectory led us to a commercialized horror film genre that we're still dealing with. I mentioned this in that podcast episode. I said, modern horror kind of takes its root from Scream. It just does. You know, you had, after that, you had the revival of the slashers. That led to the found footage because, again, we can make it cheap and we can get it out there and we can make money off of it. Which then led to the remakes of Japanese horror films and the torture porn, and, you know, we're still dealing with it. So I have hope, and I mentioned this at the end of that episode, that I have hope that, you know, the Jordan Peels of the industry now are pushing us in a way where we're moving back towards original films that put story first above profits. You know, I've really loved his work. I really hate Blumhouse, but I really love his work specifically.
So how did you break through the discovery problem other podcasts have faced? Because podcasting for so many is like better off being considered a labor of love because so many just don't get discovered.
I mean, honestly, I still struggle with it. I'm not going to lie and tell you that I've broken through it because I really haven't. I mean, the thing is that we keep doing it. And, you know, I look at our numbers and are we getting as much as, say, Film Spotting is? No. Do I care? A little bit, but not really enough to stop doing it.
Right. It doesn't make you stop.
No. And it was something where, you know, if we don't put on an episode, you know, for a week, I'll see numbers drop. You know, the other thing too is that when I started the podcast, I was single and I had one cat and that was it. You know, since then I'm married. I have one daughter and 3 stepsons and I work full time and I also teach, you know, 2 nights a week. So a lot has changed in those couple of years from 2016 to now. So, you know, I've had to adjust to that and I've had to make it work for my life. So life sometimes happens. You know, this past year, you know, we weren't putting out nearly as many episodes as we were, but we're still doing it. We're still plugging along because the way I look at it is podcasting is it's a numbers game and it's a longevity game. You know, there are a lot of dead podcasts out there that maybe only had 1 episode or 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Okay. My podcast, we're coming up on 250 and I'm still going and I plan on continue to still go. So, you know, whether or not, you know, I get, you know, more listens, I don't know. I'm not making money off of mine. I don't have sponsors. I've toyed with the idea of doing membership stuff, but at the same time, that's a lot of work. And I don't want to be that guy who puts out a membership that then is not able to deliver, you know, value. I want to deliver value to someone who's giving me money to support doing my thing. So it's one of those things that I just keep plugging away. I pick movies that I like, or that my co-host likes. My co-host is actually a lot of times in charge of what our content is. But, you know, for me, the big thing that I'm doing is coming on shows like this, you know, trying to do outreach with common shows that we cater to the same audience. And my hope is that we can support each other. So that's how I'm trying to break through the noise, is really just, you know, trying to make networks, relationships with people, and just keep doing it, you know?
That's it. You know, and I take a lot of my mentality from professional wrestling, of all things.
Yeah.
You put your friends over and they're going to put you over.
Yeah.
And if you don't have friends to put over, find a friend to put over, and they'll put you over.
Totally.
That's the name of the game.
That is the name of the game.
Before we get out of here, you want to tell everybody where they can find you on your socials and your work?
Yes. So, my work, I'll give you the link because unfortunately it's one of these Adobe portfolio sites, but I'll be more than happy to give you a link to it. But my podcast, Cinema Psycho Show, we are available wherever you listen to audio. So if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, wherever, just type in the Cinema Psychos Show and we'll be there. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Psycho Show. So at Psycho Show. I've tried experimenting with TikTok. I'm not sure how I'm doing. So if you want,
you're doing great.
I don't. Do you actually see some of my TikToks?
I did.
I'm sorry.
Keep plugging away. Keep plugging away. I do feel violated.
Okay, good.
And we'll talk about compensation later, but but continue.
but basically, yeah. If you go to at Cinema Psycho Show on TikTok, you'll find our TikTok account. Again, I'm not sure how I'm doing with this thing. I'm a 37-year-old neckbeard man who's bald and just trying it. I figured, why not give it a shot? But that's where you can find me at. And I mentioned this before, I work for a company called Libsyn. So if you go to Libsyn's YouTube channel, you can find me talking about podcasting stuff. I do that every once in a while because I'm producing those videos.
Check out the episode bio for the links to Brian's work. And thank you, Brian, for coming on to share your wisdom. It's certainly a pleasure. And coming up soon, coming up soon, we're going to be running down the classic 80s horror flick Night of the Comet with Brian. So don't miss that. But until then, I hope you all may drink the blood of your enemies from the skulls of their children.